and that in turn kind of honed my focus around healthcare, health IT, health tech. And so fast forward a few years and have been involved in a number of initiatives, either public sector and private sector, with more and more focus on health tech.
So did your past, with all of that, also influence kind of, where you're at today, as well as how you think about health tech?
I would say absolutely, and I would say since we're in the world of startups, I have experienced some cases with small and very small government contractors, and the mindset to approaching business development and business growth. Obviously, there's a inordinate focus on this concept of fundraising and investment strategies to get early money to be able to build your product. The very first company that I worked for as a civilian leaving active duty was a 35-year-old family-owned company that had been built up from the owner's garage. And there were various strategies that they basically used for growth and development. What really started was, you generate revenue through contractual services. You use that revenue to continue to invest in the company and build from there in the true bootstrapping sense, until you have a $65 million company, and then they sold it off and retired. So there were a lot of kind of what I just say, kind of the tips and tricks of the trade within industries and consulting for building business and growing business that I've tried to carry over, at least in concept, to what we're doing, what I've been involved in, and then balance that with the environment around raising funds, investment strategies, equity, etc.
I mean, it's always interesting to hear people's stories that lead them, to the place that they're at today. With your experience in healthcare and finance and identity management, I feel like this sort of leads to MyLigo. So it's almost like, this journey is serendipitous now, but probably, a very sort of, tumultuous back and forth until you got to this point.
Absolutely, and I'd be quick to point out that what we're building at MyLigo is actually identical to another company that I worked with about 4 years. Was a wholly owned portfolio company as part of a large health system. And with the pandemic and the shifts in revenue and some of the challenges a lot of health systems faced with operations and operating costs, pandemic and kind of just post pandemic in 2021, they consolidated and basically absorbed a lot of the parts and pieces of their portfolio companies, and the one that I was working with was one of those. So our technology and our approach to the market, what we were trying to offer for patients and data, kind of lay dormant for the last couple of years. And then I had, quite frankly, the good fortune that a colleague of mine who was an investigator, principal investigator on a research project that was based on this technology at the University of Texas, contacted me and said, "Hey, we think we have an opportunity to really commercialize this. Would you like to lead it?" And I said, "Absolutely." It's really a chance, kind of at your point, to revisit everything that was kind of going right and not quite going right a couple of years ago, and now reinvest it with the leadership team and get the opportunity to take it in a new direction.
Yeah. So, what can you tell me a little bit about what are patient-centric data solutions, and then what is it that MyLigo is focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I apologize. Patient-centric data solutions, it does kind of sound, like a buzzword. But it is kind of challenging to address at a high level the kind of the underlying shift to patients managing their own healthcare data. And and that still remains kind of a guidepost to the future. I think there's been lots of years and lots of initiatives that have talked about patients managing their own data that have all been kind of fluffy pink clouds that we were somehow aspiring to. In 2020, 2025, my perspective is to offer that not just from some sort of concept of nirvana, but the fact that it is now societally, on a global basis, a necessity that has to be considered. And the argument can be made it takes 5 years or 10 years to start moving towards that sort of model where you're managing your healthcare data in the same way that you manage your finances and your bank accounts and other insurance information. But the underlying demographic changes in our healthcare system, the availability of physicians, the changes in the availability of hospitals are really, in our perspective, demanding that we start moving to this. So our first step in doing that is the ability to firmly establish ID verification and patient identity that you as a patient can manage, which is very much in keeping with other international shifts towards national identity strategies and individual digital identity, and then associating that with your healthcare data. So, if two hospitals that you rarely go to don't really know you as a patient and don't really have your data, it's falling back on the individual to be able to say who they are and what their data is and being able to guide their care.
Yeah, I don't know that this ties exactly to the example that you just gave, but my parents, my dad was really good at sort of collecting their health history. And one of the main things that I studied as I was finishing my PhD was the adoption of technology, by baby boomers. And there's a certain segment of people that grew up with pencils and paper, and getting them to convert to something digital is a very hard thing to do, right? Because I mean, I could pull out this thing at any time. It doesn't have an on-off switch. And by the way, it works 100% of the time. Why would I convert to something digital? I got to charge and I got to figure out and all that kind of stuff. So, but they used to take their, I used to sort of call it like their 3-inch thick binders to different doctors whenever they would move around. And quite often, doctors just, I mean, they would set the thing aside and just have a conversation with them about whatever they were there for, instead of going through anything that was in there. And it used to really frustrate my father because he would spend a lot of time, sort of making sure that this information was perfect. And yet, you kind of think about the fact that if you had it would be nice to have like a digital record that no matter what, no matter where you were, because of your ID, transition with you. And my hope would be then that somebody would actually leverage it whenever it could help them, understand me as a patient.
Absolutely, and it harkens back to my days on active duty, where you have a service jacket and you have a military record, and I can recall plenty of times. First of all, you were essentially responsible for your service jacket, and while there were people that helped maintain it and keep it up to date, it was an expectation that you would go through it and make sure that everything you wanted to see there was there and that the records were correct. And then to your example for your dad, I still have my manila folder in my medical record that anytime you had an appointment someplace, wherever you were, either you had it in your possession or you checked it out from the ship's office or something like that, went to the doctor, they put some other piece of paper in it, and then you hand carried it back. So the skeuomorphism of having your own record is something that existed for decades that you just moved around. The real shift is that I think um, examples like your dad and others, that there are still folks that just say, well, I've seen the same doctor or I've gone to the same office for years, and they just have my information. And as we move to electronic health records, I think there was still a lot of mindset that an electronic health record is like an electronic version of your manila folder. And that's just not the case. We don't think about that in terms of data anymore. What we have to think about is healthcare data. And that data may come from something that you're wearing. It may come from your last visit to a doctor in the EHR. It may come from lab results that you had done completely independently, and how all of that is aggregated and who's responsible for aggregating it. If you go back 30 years, it was still you, even if it was pieces of paper in a folder.
Yeah, absolutely. And with regards to your website, so the MyLigo website says that 60% of hospitals risk losing patient identities due to data fraud. How does MyLigo address this issue?
Yeah, certainly. There was a really good survey done by HIMSS, the Health Information and Management Systems Society, a couple years ago, specifically around patient identity management from the perspective of how do healthcare organizations manage what they know and what they can verify about their patients. And it highlighted a number of challenges. And of course, what you pointed to was one of them.